Hey everyone, Tyler here. Thanks for dropping by. So Laowa just announced a new series of anamorphic lenses called the NANOMORPH, and that nano is true to its name. These lenses are super tiny. Now, I was lucky enough to get a pre-production evaluation unit of the 50mm version of the lens. There are some other focal lengths, a 27mm and a 35mm. There's only two that I know of, but there might be more. But I just got the 50mm in. They were kind of passing around evaluation units all over the world. And so I had a pretty limited time because I had to send it back so they could send it off to the next person. So I had a pretty limited time with that unit. And even in that time, I had some last minute projects pop up that pay the bills, unlike evaluation and test units. They don't really pay the bills. So kind of had to take priority there, but I still was able to get enough time with it to kind of formulate first impressions for this video. So that's what this video is. Not a super detailed review, kind of more of a first impressions of this lens. And again, this is just the 50mm version, just because that's what I had available to me. So that being said, my first impression, my very first reaction when unboxing this lens was, holy smokes, this thing is tiny. And this is usually when I would cue in some B-roll of showing the lens, like in my hand and on the camera and kind of stuff. But for some reason, all the B-roll that was in my B-roll folder that I took of this lens just disappeared. Some little gremlin in my computer decided to just take those files out. And now on my DaVinci Resolve timeline, just says missing file or whatever, media unlocated or whatever it's called. So the only thing I have is this picture right here that I took. That is on my red Komodo, and you can kind of see how tiny this lens is. And like Phil Holland, he on Instagram and Facebook, he posted a picture of this lens on top of a US dollar bill, just to kind of give you reference of how small this lens is. And it's just tiny. It's just crazy. Now, I do want to mention that I did get a pre-production evaluation unit, so keep that in mind with everything that I say in this video. Things could change, whether it's the optical elements or the design or anything like that. So just keep that in mind throughout this review. But anyways, yes, this lens, it is a very, very small lens, and there's a ton of benefits, and we'll get to that here in a minute. But continuing on with like the build and design of this lens, the front element or the front filter thread on the unit that I got was a 55mm front filter thread, which is pretty small. Most of all my filters and defilters and everything are minimum 77mm, but that wasn't a big deal because I just went on Amazon, got a 55mm to 77mm step-up ring, and was able to use all of my variable ND filters and all that kind of good stuff. So the filter thread size to me isn't really that big of a deal. Now, as for build quality, these things are built very tough, really good construction. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, it was an all metal construction, but even still, they kept it very lightweight. It's somewhere between 300 and 400 grams, which is really lightweight for a cinema lens or anamorphic lens, or anything. I mean, any lens is a really light lens. So benefits there are mounting it on a gimbal. Like I have the original DJI Ronin S, and I mounted the red Komodo with this lens and a little PD Movie Live Air wireless follow focus on there, and was able to balance it no problem. And that's super awesome because that kind of opens up a lot of doors for flying it on gimbals or drones or FPV. I've seen a lot of people put Komodos on FPV drones, which is pretty stinking cool. So you can kind of get that anamorphic look. So if you're using these anamorphic lenses on a project and you need to throw it on a gimbal, you don't have to change out to a different lens and kind of fake the anamorphic look in post. You can just use the same lenses, which I think is pretty awesome. All right, well, that's gonna kind of wrap up my first impressions of the physical characteristics of the lens, like the build quality and size and all that stuff that I just talked about. But now I kind of want to shift gears and talk about the optical quality and like performance of this lens, because I think this is where things get really interesting. Now, right off the bat, I want to emphasize that this is not like Tokina Vista 1 or like some of the Sigma Art Prime sharpness level. Like we're not talking, it's not a super clinically sharp and perfect lens like you're gonna get with those Tokina Primes, and those are like my favorite lenses in the world. Like I love shooting on those, but they are very sharp, and in front of a digital sensor, I pretty much always throw like a Hollywood Black Magic or Black Pro Mist in front, just because of how sharp those lenses are, just to kind of knock the digital edge off of those lenses. But with the nanomorph lenses, I'd never found the need to use any diffusion filters personally. And the whole time that I had with this lens to test and all that kind of stuff, I never once put a black pro mist filter on there. I did once and felt like it was kind of overkill for it, even just a 1/8 strength. So for the rest of the time using it, I just left it without any diffusion filter and thought the lens looked great. Now that's not to say that this lens is soft. It's not soft by any means. It's just not that clinical sharpness that you get with some of these modern stills lenses. And that's kind of like how I like to characterize this lens. It's a kind of a modern lens with a lot of vintage characteristics. And to me, that's really awesome. That's really exciting, and it's something that I personally would look for either renting or purchasing a new set of lenses, especially for anamorphic lenses, because a lot of the anamorphic lenses that I really like the Laowa anamorphics and stuff, they are kind of got these like funky characteristics like barrel distortion and stuff, and some people don't like it, but for me personally, I really like that look. So like I just mentioned, with barrel distortion, these nanomorph lenses definitely do exhibit barrel distortion. And by these lenses, I mean the 50mm version that I had definitely exhibited some barrel distortion on the edge of the frame, especially with objects that are, you know, closer to the frame. When you're shooting wide landscapes, it really isn't noticeable at all, but something that you need to be aware of. And like I said at the beginning of this little section, this is not your perfect clinical lens. It's definitely a lens that looks really good, but for me, it's perfectly detailed, not overly sharp, without the diffusion filters. And for me, that's a huge bonus, because then when I start applying diffusion filters in the future, if I were to pick up a set of these lenses or rent, I could apply the diffusion filters like a Pro Mist or something for specific purposes to maybe bloom highlights a little bit more or something. But for the most part, for like skin tones and interview kind of style setup, like I did a little mock interview setup, and I thought the lens was, it looked just fine without diffusion filters. And that's all I'm gonna say about diffusion filters, because I feel like I've said that like a billion times already. So yeah, so let's kind of move on now. I did a couple of tests, like kind of in my living room, just to kind of see like what the bokeh would look like and the focus breathing and all that kind of stuff. And there is some focus breathing. It's not insane. Like the focus breathing, obviously it's not an anamorphic lens, but the Sigma 50 to 100 has got like notoriously bad focus breathing. It's nowhere near that level. It's honestly not that big of a deal. It's not a deal breaker for me, but you can kind of see here this focus test that I did, and you can kind of see some of the focus breathing that's going on. Now moving on to the bokeh, this is something that's very characteristic of anamorphic lenses. You can kind of get that oval shaped bokeh in the background, and that's definitely present here. Now if you can see this shot here wide open at t2.4, you can see that there's a little bit of color fringing on the edges of kind of this bluish green color fringing on the edge of the bokeh. And then off to the right side of the frame, you can kind of see that the lights there, the bokeh kind of looks a little disfigured. So I think that has maybe something to do with the barrel distortion. Not really sure exactly. I'm not a lens scientist or anything like that. But as soon as you stop down to T4, that kind of disfiguration kind of goes away and kind of cleans up, and you can kind of see there it kind of looks a little bit more uniform, but you still see a little bit of that color fringing there on the edge. And finally, of course, we'll talk about lens flare. And with this lens, you get that classic anamorphic lens flare that you expect from anamorphic lenses. Now on the version that I tested, it had an amber flare, and it also had an orange ring around the lens. I've also seen versions of the lens with a blue ring around the barrel of the lens, so I'm not sure if there are blue and amber flare versions of these lenses. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but the lens that I had an amber flare, and I actually prefer that over the blue flare if you had to choose one over the other, especially for daylight exterior scenes, maybe at golden hour or something like that, or if you're shooting against tungsten lights. An amber flare looks just a little bit more natural than a blue flare against a warm color source. So yeah, that's just personal preference for me. I mean, I would much prefer just a neutral color to begin with, but if I were to choose one or the other, definitely amber would be my preference, especially for daylight exteriors, but everyone's tastes and opinions are different and not necessarily wrong, just different. So that's just kind of what my preference is. But as you can see here in this shot with there's the LED light on my cell phone, you're definitely getting that amber flare going on. And when I throw on this the source for tungsten source, you can see you get that amber flare as well. So no matter really the light source, you're still getting that colored flare. So something to be aware of if you are considering purchasing this lens. Just be aware that it's not going to be a neutral color. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say there, and pretty much about everything. And I'm just going to wrap up this video because that's pretty much all I have to say with my first impressions of this lens. I'm really, really stoked on these lenses. Based on the price point that they're at right now, which I'll just leave a link in the description because prices always change. Very affordable for an anamorphic lens, especially for how unique this lens is because of how small it is. Now it's only designed for super 35mm sensors, and it's a 1.5 times anamorphic, so that might be a downside to some people, but for Red Komodo users or people shooting on the V-Raptor in 6K, or even people on full frame sensors just want to frame and crop in and post, then this is a great little lens set. So like I said, I'll leave a link in the description to where you can order them, and they're going to have various mounts. I had an RF mount, but there should be EF and PL, and I read somewhere that there's some other mounts out there as well. So it seems like they're going to pretty much have any camera system covered, whether you use a native mount or adapt it. So yeah, all really exciting, and yeah, appreciate you watching. Super awesome lenses, definitely very characteristic, so definitely keep that in mind. But it's an anamorphic lens, so I mean, it's kind of what you expect from anamorphic lenses, at least in my opinion. So thanks for watching. Hope you found this helpful or useful. Sorry it was all over the place, but that's why I should probably make a script for things instead of just rambling. But regardless, here we are. Thanks so much for watching and stopping by. Consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. And let me know if you have an interest in getting these lenses. I certainly am. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. I've said that like 1,000 times already. And I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.